Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Welcome back to The Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrandt, that fine gentleman over there, as always in the heart of the Midwest, the incomparable Dan Rubenstein. Back from his trip abroad. For folks who listen on the public feed, you'll know that we've been going here nonstop. We did pre-tape some of those episodes because my man Dan was over in the great city of Barcelona. Yeah.
Barcelona. I wish it would be wonderful to say, how great is it to be back here with you? But that would be a lie, Ty, because if I were still roaming the streets of Barcelona, eating cured meats and drinking and sleeping and not having the obligations of a profession and fatherhood and homeowners, all that kind of, that would be wonderful. It would be great to still be there on the Mediterranean. But if there is a runner-up, if there is a second place, Ty, it is a joy to be back here with you and with everybody listening.
Well, thank you, Dan. It is a pleasure to be back with you as well. For those who are listening out there, please hit subscribe or follow so that you don't miss any of our public episodes. Please tell your friends about the show on Twitter, on Facebook, really anywhere. Paper leaflets spread about your neighborhood. Whatever works for you works for us. SolidVerbal.com, of course, is the website you can follow along on social media. And if you really like what we do, patreon.com/solidverbal, or just simply verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com is how you can go on out to our Patreon. We're going to start ramping stuff up now because the season's getting a little bit bigger in the window, Dan. This is our last of the Power 5 schedule previews that we're doing. We're also going to do a group of 5 episode a little bit later on this week, but it starts to tumble downhill pretty quickly after this week, right? Because next week we're in mid-June. Before long, we've got preview publications that are dropping. Before long, we're getting into actual win total projections. We're getting into actual team projections. We're getting into the true preseason content that many folks start to tune in for.
Yes,
so
I think
here we are.
Some of the magazines have already dropped. I think I've seen some screenshots from Athlon where you look at like the projected 2 deep and you're like, bro, 7 of those guys are no longer on the team, which is not the fault of Athlon or Phil Steele or Lindy's or whoever's putting out these publications. Does Lindy still exist? I hope so.
It might, yeah.
Street and Smiths? I don't know. I don't know who's doing which sport, whatever, but it is a tough nut to crack in terms of keeping track of rosters in the portal era. But yeah, that's the first sign of good things ahead. It's great.
Shall we dive into the Big 12 schedule preview?
Yes. Is there any news you want to get into?
No, I want to get right into the Big 12.
Oh, man. I had SEC schedule thoughts, but that's sort of old now. We can get into later this week.
Later this week. Come on.
All right.
Let's go. Give me the sound. Give me the sound. Give me the sound. Big 12. Big 12.
How many teams we have?
We have 14 in the Big 12
right.
now. So you can believe that.
Yep.
Brett Yormark said that the Big 12 is going to be undergoing a bit of a rebrand. That does not include a new name or a new logo or new really anything, just a rebrand, which for my money means a dumb slogan. I tweeted that out. If we get a dumb slogan out of this rebrand, I feel like it's worth it.
What would your dumb slogan be?
Oh, I don't know. I don't do dumb slogans. You know me. I'm much more higher brow than that.
Coast to coast excellence-ish.
You know, he's big on having teams in 4 time zones.
Right.
He's really big on having teams in 4 time zones.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe they've done that yet. They might, depending on where you stand with respect to conference realignment. But I think he's really going for the coast to coast AM whole thing.
Yeah.
If he can get there. So maybe we'll see.
Usually the rebrands involve logos. Apparently it's not a logo thing. That just makes the eyes of the mascot angrier. They're like, rebrand, or like it's an angry mouth. How about that? Big 12, America's angry mouth.
I would hope that we would at some point get a new logo that features like the magic eye version of the Big 12 logo where it says 12, but much like the Big 10 did,
right,
it actually has a secret number 14 embedded within.
Mm-hmm. That's worthy. That's worthwhile. I think that's what it is. It's gonna be something that it's gonna be cutesy. That's all.
But there's no logo. He said no logo, at least not with
right
this purported rebrand thing. Anyway, look, we did 4 big conferences before this one. Go back and listen to all of those. On the Big 12 side, Dan, for my money, the most interesting conference in America, as it has been for the last 10 years running, because we've got blue blood teams that people genuinely care about playing at a time when most of the rest of the country can actually watch, unlike the Pac-12.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got enough parity, at least in that meaty middle, where pretty much anybody can beat anybody. Even at the top, there's a lot of parity there. This year, there is the added dimension of everyone wanting to embarrass Texas and Oklahoma on their way out before they go on over to the SEC. And so I just think a lot to stack on top that makes this conference really, really interesting. Where do you stand on what you imbibed with respect to all things Big 12?
So when I looked at the schedule, it's nearly impossible because of how much there is new with the conference, with 4 new teams who have not played a Power 5 schedule or a major conference schedule in the case of Cincinnati in quite some time. In the case of schools like BYU and UCF and Houston, ever in the modern era, right? And so you're questioning, okay, how are they going to respond to what we perceive to be increased difficulty in the Big 12 as to their previous recent schedules or conference affiliations? And then you have a number of teams who have recently been dangerous, but have either fallen off recently, your Oklahomas, Iowa States, whatever, or recently jumped up unexpectedly, your Kansas States, TCUs. And so there's a hierarchy in terms of brand size with like Texas and Oklahoma. But as I looked at this menu, I was like, this schedule, which is, I guess, a menu in its own way. When I looked at it, for the first time, maybe ever, I thought to myself, when do they get TCU? When do they get Kansas State? Oh, Kansas State's here. Like, does a team miss Kansas State and TCU? I've never thought about a Big 12 schedule like that. I believe Cincinnati misses both. If I'm not mistaken, I think they miss Kansas State and TCU. So bully for the Cats. So it was very different because, and then you look at stretches and you're like, Baylor and then Iowa State and then Cincinnati. That could be really scary. Or maybe not, right?
And that's what I found really interesting about this. I'm glad you brought that up.
That was my phrase that pays. Or maybe not.
Yeah, a good chunk of this exercise, especially with the Big 12, is not about situations,
right,
or looking at home road splits or anything like that. Instead, it's about trying to look and project forward with very little information. And I think that totally applies to the Big 12 because there are 4 new teams.
Mm-hmm.
This is my disclaimer, in a sense. I have no idea how to factor in how the 4 new teams will affect a Texas or an Oklahoma schedule. And I don't think Vegas knows either how to price in these new teams when it comes to win totals. Of the 4 new teams, UCF has the highest over-under at 6.5. BYU is 5.5. Both Cincy and Houston are at 4.5. I would expect one of those 4 teams is going to go over. It ain't going to be Cincinnati, I can tell you that. Okay. One of the 3 other teams are going to go over.
But Cincinnati has the schedule to be inflated, though,
Cincinnati
right?
has the schedule.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just really, really fascinating to me to go through this team by team and try to project out how it all factors in. Like I said, we've done 4 of these before, and we're always high on situational awareness and gumpies and traps and all that stuff.
Fettuccine.
The Big 12 to some extent is beyond all that, just because there are so many unknowns, and I think that's what makes it interesting.
So to me, well, I'll ask you first. When you look at these teams, and now that we have an off season of coaching changes and recruiting and portals and blah, 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 who are you most positive right? In your knowledge loins, Ty, where are you most confident? Like, not necessarily that this team will be excellent, this team will be terrible, but like, who do you feel like you have the most pronounced handle on? Like, to me, I think Texas and Kansas State. Not necessarily that they're going to finish 1 and 2 and go to the championship game, but because of quarterbacks returning, coach experience, like I feel like I know what Texas's deficiencies are. I feel like I know what Kansas State's are. And because it's like, was it a year 1 just explosion for TCU? So I think those are the teams right now that I'm like, okay, I can see where they're going to trip, like why they'll trip. I can see why they'll excel or improve. Those are the 2 to me where I'm like, all right, what did I use? Knowledge loins? I apologize for that. But like, do you have 2 where you're like, okay, that's what I feel?
I think Kansas State and Texas are good answers. I would also add Oklahoma in there. And
okay.
There's a fair amount of new with Oklahoma that we can get into, and we'll talk a lot more about when we get into previews and all that. This is just trying to focus as much as we can on the schedule. But on the Oklahoma side, at least with respect to the schedule, I did go through that experiment of, all right, where might they trip up? And I didn't find a whole lot of obvious spots.
Okay.
And so for me, I would add Oklahoma to that list as well. I feel like they're stable enough that I could add them to that tier. And that actually pairs up pretty well with what I think is the top tier. If you look at over-unders and things of that nature, Vegas would tell you that the over-under, the top tier is Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas State in that order.
Okay. Can we start with Kansas State? Because we've been starting with defending champions. And look, Big 12 goes through the Little Apple this year, right?
Yeah, 8.5. 8.5 is your over-under.
Mm-hmm.
It sets up, the schedule does extremely well for another run at the Big 12. Extremely well. Their toughest road game is at Texas late in the year. But beyond that, this is a schedule that's got, I think, really good buffers.
Buffer zone.
It's just a masterpiece.
Okay.
I could see a white knuckler on the road at Mizzou in week 3 when teams are still kind of settling in. But if we go through this schedule game by game, I want you to count with me the number of guaranteed losses. Are you ready?
Sure.
Southeast Missouri week 1, Troy week 2. Feel pretty good about those?
Feel good.
At Mizzou week 3, UCF at home week 4. Either of those a guaranteed loss in your mind?
Not guaranteed, but I think
Guaranteed
at
loss.
Mizzou is tricky.
At Oklahoma State on a Friday night off of a bye. At Texas Tech the week after, excuse me. So back-to-back road games.
Right.
Guaranteed losses, any of them?
I would worry about at Texas Tech, but no, not like overwhelming sensation.
The Texas Tech game, by the way, the road game at Texas Tech week 7 is a week before TCU at home, followed by Houston at home. Either of those a guaranteed loss in your mind?
No.
At Texas week 10, guaranteed loss?
I think that's what I feel most pronounced about in this moment, but I don't know.
It's not guaranteed, but it's in your mind probable is what you're telling me.
I think it's...
You think they lose?
If I had to bet $100 American today, I would bet on Texas.
And then they close out home against Baylor, at Kansas, home against Iowa State.
No, nothing crazy dangerous there.
So the over-under is 8.5. I feel great about that over-under just based on this quick thought experiment. We should point out Chris Kleiman's got to replace Deuce Vaughn, Malik Knowles,
right?
Some big hitters on defense. So it's not like this is going to be a plug and play 11-win season for K-State, but you could very easily build the case that this is potentially a 10-win team.
So who do they miss? They miss Oklahoma and who?
Miss Oklahoma for sure.
Mm-hmm. BYU.
There's no game here against BYU, although I'm not crazy about BYU this season. There's no game against Cincinnati.
Right.
I'm not crazy about Cincinnati this season either. It just sets up really well. There's no murderer's row. There's no string of games here that you think is going to test their mettle. We've been talking about fettuccine Alfredo situations where you got a carb load to get ready for the murderer's row.
Right.
I don't see any of those in this K-State schedule.
I mean, that's a tough back-to-back after the bye, though. Look, or maybe not, right? With Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. So it's shaping up to be really strong if they're able to replace what they replace. Will Howard picks up after where he was last year. The defense comes along. And look, it's a wonderful schedule, but last year could have also been a perfect year with upperclassmen and star power at running back and the emergence probably unexpectedly to a lot of Kansas State fans with Will Howard. Like it's one of those things where if you're Kansas State, you're not recruiting on a level that makes it easy to go back to back.
That's right. And the one point that I would add here, and then maybe we should go to Oklahoma State because I think they're fascinating as well. The two teams that I kept coming back to in the Big 12, if Baylor or if Iowa State is any good this year, it could alter half of the schedules that we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
know,
they missed
those
Iowa
are
State
sort
as
of
well,
like
right? Oh, no, they finished with Iowa State, obviously.
Finished with Iowa State.
Farmageddon,
But those are the two teams for me that are kind of like the tipping points in a sense.
Right.
Where if they're good, then suddenly we have to have a different conversation. I'm not saying one way or the other. I could totally see the case where Baylor is pretty good. I could totally see a case where Iowa State is much improved.
That's why I generally tend to look at this like how many of the quarterbacks on this schedule are capable of winning big games or have already shown an ability or a ceiling to win big games. And you look at Kansas State quarterbacks, it's Brady Cook, Alan Bowman, Tyler Shuck, Chandler Morris, like Quinn Ewers can be scary at his best. It's a Blake Shapen situation. Kansas has a good quarterback. Iowa State, like there's just not a lot that appear to be obviously sharp daggers in the pocket.
I agree. Let's go to Oklahoma State. Can we go to Oklahoma State?
Let's.
Oklahoma State, for my money, is the best schedule in the Big 12. They have easily the best road schedule in the Big 12.
Yes.
They have 5 true road games. They're at Arizona State in week 2. And then once they get into conference games, they're at Iowa State, West Virginia, UCF, and Houston. Again, in conference. The schedule's buffered really well.
Buffer zone.
But the over-under is 6.5. And I thought about this a lot. And I eventually arrived at the conclusion that where you stand on the Oklahoma State over-under of 6.5 says more about you and how you feel about Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
And how Vegas feels about Oklahoma State than it does about Oklahoma State itself.
Right.
It's like the ultimate inkblot test with respect to preseason previews and Big 12 and projecting and just where you see the conference as a whole. Provided the Pokes aren't a disaster, I would think they would hit 7 pretty easily with this. But I don't know if we can take it as a certainty that they won't be a disaster because I don't know what the hell to expect out of Oklahoma State this year. Is that fair to you?
Yeah, look, if we're talking about big picture, it's a combination not just of the playoff, but quarterback and defense. There's talent up front on Oklahoma State's defense. It does not appear that they have a upper level winning quarterback like they have had relatively recently.
Right.
And if you're a believer in the over, that means you are positive that Mike Gundy has not lost his fastball. That you're positive that there have been things out of his control these past few years, be it injury, coach attrition, whatever, and coach attrition can be in his control, that Mike Gundy is the same guy that he was 7 years ago or something like that. I'm not positive that's the case, which is why I think we're aligned. The schedule's great, kind of, but they're also a prime example of like, if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you're looking at the schedule and you're like, okay, where are the wins here? And a lot of them are on the road.
Right. So to go back to what you just said a moment ago.
Yeah.
If Mike Gundy's the same dude he was 7 years ago, there's a win here against Central Arkansas, Arizona State, South Alabama, West Virginia. I say probably Cincinnati. I say probably Houston and BYU. All right, that's 7. That's an easy 7 if it is the Gundy of 7 years ago.
Sure.
But I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know how this Oklahoma State team looks in late November when BYU comes to town. I don't know how they look in mid to late October when Cincinnati comes to town or a week prior when they go on the road to West Virginia. It seems to me there are a handful of those games here where I would think Oklahoma State should be better than West Virginia, let's say, but the game's on the road.
Right.
And I don't know what to make of West Virginia at that point in the season. Maybe they already fired Neil Brown in week 8. Who knows? So there's a lot of uncertainty here. I get why the over-under is where it is. And that's why I said at the very top of this, how you feel about Oklahoma State says more about you than it does about them. It's a confidence thing.
Right. I'm fully out. At this moment, maybe I'll change my mind when I go back and look at like the actual rosters and offseason moves. But when we talked about Oklahoma State not terribly long ago, it was a lot more quality leaving Stillwater than entering. And after the way that they finished last year, were you the tie of today 7 years ago? Not that I mean, there are similar attributes here. You were a stand-up guy back in whatever 2016 as you are now, but like you've evolved and, gotten better and worse at everything like everybody does. And so like, I don't know. I don't see this ship being salvaged.
Let's go to Oklahoma.
Yes.
9.5 over under. Tied with Texas atop the conference in terms of win totals. I think if I am picking one team, for the record, I don't think any teams are going undefeated this year in the Pac-12 or the Big 12, excuse me. But if I'm picking one team that would go undefeated, I would probably pick Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma would be my pick. Texas has Alabama. We'll talk about that game. I don't, they were close to beating them a year ago, so maybe they'll have a better shot this year with more talent, and they're going to Tuscaloosa. Who knows? But if I'm picking one, it's probably Oklahoma because I think the schedule's kind of perfect. There are no guaranteed losses on this thing. Obviously, the rival against Texas. And then you're squinting, I think, for other situations where it could get weird. Could they lose at Kansas a week before the Bedlam game?
Sure.
I think that's possible. If they play defense last year, it's definitely possible.
Mm-hmm.
That game was a shootout a year ago, like 52-42, something like
game.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good game. Could they lose to Oklahoma State on the road?
I mean, Oklahoma State played them tough last year. That was just a disastrous first quarter and a half. But after that, it was dead even. Yeah.
They could. But there aren't a whole lot of games on here outside of Texas that I'm all that scared of.
Mm-hmm.
Even the TCU game, week 13. I don't know what to make of TCU this year. We can talk about TCU next. That is a game, week 13, Black Friday. At home, I have no idea what to make of TCU. I really don't. I don't know what to do with them, where to put them. So for me, I feel like as long as Oklahoma State does not maintain its poor airspeed on defense and can just marginally improve on that side of the ball, the offense will be fine, and they're probably going to win 10 games with this. But again, there's a lot of unknown here.
Man, you are higher on OU than I am right now.
Why aren't you high on OU? Explain that to me.
We've got a brittle quarterback and coming off a disastrous season, and it's a conference that has a super high floor. Like, it just feels like to me at the top of this conference is going to be a bunch of there's 3 9-3 teams. We got to figure out the tiebreaker. Like, when you say there's no obvious losable games, that's fine, but there's no obvious winnable, especially on the road, especially if a team is, by and large quality. Like, to say a team has the best shot of going undefeated. I'm not saying that. You are saying that Oklahoma looks like they're going to go undefeated. Schedule's pretty great, but it's also it's pretty great in that the obvious losses aren't clearly there, but what kind of handle do we have on Oklahoma's improvement this year? Like, if we're going to go strictly on talent of the roster, they should definitely improve, sometimes dramatically so, given who they should be playing and what the other rosters look like. But to say Oklahoma is in a position to go 10, 11, 12 wins or something like that, I'm just not there. Not there. And look, they're going to adjust on defense. They're going to be better on defense. But
hold on. Let me pause you there.
Who scares you that Dylan Gabriel's throwing to, handing it off? Like, where's the pop here?
Let me play devil's advocate of my own argument.
All right,
if I could, for
double
a second.
devil.
I feel pretty good about Oklahoma. I think they will improve. I agree with you.
Yeah,
we had Eddie Radosevich on.
Yeah,
and we tried to pin him down a little bit to the best that we could to get an answer about the defense thing.
Mm-hmm.
Defense was a problem last year. Remember, we made all these jokes about Ted Roof, and Brent Venables is supposed to be a defensive-minded guy coming over from Clemson. He's going to get him playing tougher.
Right.
They weren't good on defense last year. It was kind of a debacle. And when we asked him, Eddie, who is very much in the know about Oklahoma football, for some signs of this is going to get better, what went wrong, he wasn't really able to give us any. That doesn't mean it won't get better. I still believe that it will because I believe in Brent Venables to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
But we have not necessarily seen proof that will happen. And so I agree to some extent, while I am maybe pumping sunshine here into Sooner Nation, I'm with you that maybe it is a more responsible approach to just take a wait and see perspective here. Thankfully for Oklahoma, it does set up pretty well through the first 5 weeks of the season. Arkansas State, SMU, road games at Tulsa and Cincinnati before they come back home and play Iowa State before the Texas game.
Mm-hmm.
So the first 5 weeks of the season, we hopefully at that point should have a better understanding of where the defense is at. There aren't a whole lot of offenses there that scare me, but at least I think before we get to Texas, we'll have a better sense for, is this defense improved? Is it not improved?
Sure. I'm also just saying they could split post-bye. If the defense is average, each of those teams, I mean, look, you can say West Virginia might really, truly struggle this year. West Virginia's on a winning streak against Oklahoma, right?
Yeah.
So, UCF, decent average defense. Gus Malzahn calling the offense. We'll see. They could be scary. That game's in Norman. At Kansas, should have offensive firepower, testing what might still be an average to below average defense from Oklahoma. Oklahoma State, on the road in Stillwater, rivalry. West Virginia, again, they lost. At BYU at altitude. You know how I feel about that, Ty. Defense that doesn't always perform, now going to some thin air. And then TCU, who blew the doors off them last year. They could go 3-3 to finish out the season, not to mention anything at the front of the year with Texas, whatever, and Red River. So I'm just not there. You show me something catastrophic last year, even with some improvement. I'm definitely not confident. So, yeah, could they go 9-3? Certainly. But I don't know. The difference, I think there's a gulf between like 8 and 10 wins. Yeah. And I just don't see it. And look, the transfers are pretty good. The recruiting class, if they get some early impact guys, especially coming off the edge, yeah, that changes calculus. But we'll see.
We'll save the Texas conversation until a little bit later on in this episode.
Sure.
But we should talk about TCU.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about K-State, we should talk about TCU. TCU defending national runner-up, Dan. Can you believe that?
If that's a phrase, sure. Yes.
It's not.
Okay.
It's not. Just made it up.
Yeah.
But a hell of a season for Sonny Dykes in year one. Now they are absolutely decimated with losses on offense. Yeah. I would not touch this over-under with a 10-foot pole. It feels like there is way too much uncertainty to me. We had the TCU conversation when we were going through our year one debriefs. I believe TCU was the last one that we did. Mm-hmm. And the conclusion that we came to as a result of that was basically, hey, great first year, Sonny Dykes, but also we have no idea what year two has in store. Yeah. There have been many great coaches, many big name coaches who have been felled by incredibly productive first seasons that they could not ever follow up on in year 2, 3, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I hope for TCU's sake, Sonny Dykes doesn't fall into that category, but Vegas is taking a very much wait and see approach. 7.5 over under. This schedule is big time backloaded, so they'll have a little bit of a chance to get their legs under them before they get to Kansas State, Texas, Oklahoma. Those three teams, by the way, the last 6 weeks of the season. So they've got, for my money here, about 7 weeks to figure it out. And then after that, that's when the rubber meets the road. First 7 weeks are Colorado, Nichols, at Houston, home against SMU and West Virginia, at Iowa State, week 7, home against BYU. That's not bad. No. That's not bad. After that, though, at Kansas State before a bye, at Texas Tech on a Thursday after the bye, Texas at home, Baylor at home, at Oklahoma, Black Friday to close out the season. Sort of the tale of two cities here for this TCU schedule. Again, your over-under is 7.5, Dan. Where do you stand here?
I'm not crazy confident in the under, but if you're looking for value right now, betting against TCU early part of the Big 12 schedule, yeah, we kind of had a concept for what the best and worst of a Sonny Dykes team was. And if last year was truly, finishing those close games, coming back, from deficits at halftime or the start of the fourth quarter, getting a performance all season long from Max Duggan, willing this team across the finish line much more often than not, the championship game or championship games notwithstanding, TCU would be an unbelievable value to bet against right now. Even though that win total is not especially high, that sometimes there's a regression to the mean. Sometimes there is an idea of like, okay, they lose their offensive coordinator. They lose their clear best receiver. They lose their best quarterback of the last, since Trevon Boykin or whatever, 9-10 years. And we're expected, talent at running back, talent along the lines. Like, I think there's a lot of value in saying, yeah, they could get better by the end of the year, but we kind of have an idea of like what a Sonny Dykes team is between SMU and Cal. And if they don't have that talent on both sides of the ball, and they're making, they're replacing an offensive coordinator who was sensational last year, I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of, field goal doinks instead of field goals to win kind of thing. And so this has the feeling of a 6-6 type team. A growth year.
I mean, bear in mind they're replacing their quarterback, their top 2 rushers, their, I believe, 3 leading receivers, 3 guys along the line. It's a lot.
Right.
It's a lot new. And as you said at the very top of this show, it's not so much the defense that was powering this team. It was very much the Sonny Dykes offense, the quick strike offense, the big plays. That was how they got where they eventually did last season. We can't count on any of that this year. And I believe in Sonny Dykes as a bright offensive mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think he'll have them playing good offense, certainly top half of the nation offense. That's not even a question. But how quickly do they get up to speed? What's it look like week 6 when they go to Iowa State? I don't know. A lot of unknown. This is why the conference is so damn interesting.
It's great.
It's great. There's so many unknowns here. Maybe not great for a TCU fan, but you just had a charmed season a year ago. That sometimes this is what you have to deal with while things are kind of setting in.
Look, we can be proven wrong almost immediately. Whatever they do against Colorado doesn't matter. But as I see it today, in early June, at Houston onward, so that's what, week 4 onward, they all seem losable to me. Wow,
you're going back a few days or a few weeks then. Okay.
They all seem losable because of either where that game is, the idea that I don't think they're going to be playing in shootouts. Like, I think the defense should be actually pretty decent and look more like what they did before Georgia. But, after a few rough weeks as they adjusted, I just think it's the fact that they didn't go after a quarterback in the portal worries me a little bit. Or maybe they did and just struck out. I don't know. It has the makings of a 500-ish, 7-5.
So you're saying a little bit of this.
I ate more fettuccine Alfredo and drank less water than I have in my entire life.
So you're saying TCU's got a little bit of fettuccine Alfredo in the schedule, and I think I agree.
After that bye week with the carb loading, at Texas Tech, Texas Baylor, at OU. And
That's
what
tough.
they needed to beat those teams at times, they didn't need much to beat Oklahoma, mind you. But
right,
I see a world in which the 3-point wins become 3-point losses.
Let's go to Baylor. Baylor's over under 7.5.
Yeah.
Their home road splits are actually pretty tremendous here. Just 4 road games and on the road just once before week 8, which is beautiful. What's not to love about that? They get both Utah and Texas at home in that early stretch. Their road games are at UCF, Cincinnati, K-State, and TCU. The K-State and TCU games are on back-to-back weeks, which is a tough little stretch. There is a little bit of a gump factor with the schedule. I'm not going to play the...
I have it written down, Ty, so if it's double gump, so be it.
You want me to play it? I can play it.
Yeah.
I must have drank me about 15 Dr. Peppers.
Yeah.
I have King Gump being Kansas. We can talk about why for 2 specific
I have
games,
Cincinnati. You can go, though.
But Baylor's got a little bit of a gumpy situation.
Define
here.
that for people who don't know.
Again, they're just everywhere. They're in weird situations. They just pop up.
They find
on
themselves
other schedules.
Yes, they find themselves in unusual, weird, unexpected situations all season long, like Forrest Gump, across the country, across the world. Yeah.
They get both Kansas State and TCU a week after each of those teams plays Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Bear in mind, good situations does not necessarily translate to wins. But Baylor's got, I think, a really advantageous situation here across the board. But they also have a lot that they have to sort out this season. They're like 100th in returning production. Last year, they were very inconsistent. Some things were great. Richard Reese, we love Richard Reese. Guy was a revelation.
Mm-hmm.
But Blake Shapen threw too many picks. The defense had one of the weirder profiles.
Yeah.
That I've seen in a while. They were bad almost exclusively when it counted the most.
Which is why Ron Roberts has a new job.
Right. That's why he's got a new job.
Yeah.
But third downs in the red zone, they were able to generate pressure, but not sacks. Just a lot of lumpiness, let's say, on the defensive side of the ball that they got to work out. But this all lends itself to the argument I made earlier that Baylor is that almost that like linchpin team, that tipping point team in the schedules of all of their opponents, where if they're good and if they're formidable, and if Blake Shapen is not throwing 10 interceptions, then perhaps Baylor is a tougher opponent than meets the eye. But coming off of last season, looking at a 7.5 win total, it feels to me like there's as much uncertainty in Vegas as there is on this podcast about the Baylor Bears.
Yeah, and it's Utah after Utah plays Florida, I believe. And just
Correct.
in terms of the gumpiness, it's a sunshine sandwich in which they get UCF, right, between the Kansas schools. I think you had that phrase. I might have stolen that phrase from you. Sunshine sandwich.
Well, the sunshine sandwich, I believe, that's a different situation.
Well, no, they have, in terms of their gumpiness, UCF has a sunshine sandwich, right?
Oh, okay.
So
Gotcha.
they are the ones who play. Baylor
That's right.
plays UCF
That's
in
right.
between UCF getting the Kansas schools. Yeah.
My apologies. I misunderstood. Yeah. Baylor is the patty in between the sunflower sandwich.
Yes.
Between
there it is.
road games at K-State in week 4 and
Correct.
a road game at Kansas in week 6.
And so it's TCU, I believe, in a Red River sandwich as well, right?
Yeah.
They're a double patty.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't feel anything about Baylor. I don't feel bad things coming for Baylor. I don't feel good things coming for Baylor. They not just gumpy to me, but they're like an or maybe not team to me. They're just, I don't know. Like, man, you have Baylor right there. Lucky for you. Or damn, that's tough. Sorry about that. So I think the schedule, it's the same thing that you said about Oklahoma State. What you feel about Baylor's number says more about you than where Baylor is right now, because at any given moment you feel like they could go completely cold doing something.
Where do you want to go next?
Let's go. You want to save Texas, or should we go Texas?
Let's go to Texas. We can go to
Okay.
Texas here.
Let's do it.
Texas 9.5 win total. I am really high on Texas this year. I'm not ashamed to say it. I think you're in a similar camp.
I am.
We both feel really good about the state of the program, what Sark is doing. As compared to his first season, last year we saw a really big jump on the defensive side of the ball. Not unanimously, but where it counts, they took a really big jump. It was their best defense in 5 years. They were the best in the nation, for example, at forcing teams into third downs.
Great.
This season, offensively, we will look to see what the offense looks like now because Bijan Robinson is in the NFL.
Yep.
That will be a problem. But look, they're solid. They're solid. They've got a lot of talent. I don't necessarily like this schedule with respect to a playoff run.
Okay.
I'm just treating this season, this schedule, as another potentially high watermark for Sark. Because now he's in year 3. He needs to keep proving himself at a place like Texas, that he's building momentum, especially ahead of that SEC move.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the highlights on this schedule, you've got the Bama game on the road in Tuscaloosa week 2. Who knows, honestly, what to expect there. It's early in the year. If you're going to get Bama early, that's probably the best time to do it. Bama's got its own things that it needs to sort out with a new offensive staff, a new quarterback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If they're playing Tyler Buckner week 2, you know where I stand. I'm incredibly biased on that front. I'm just not a Buckner believer.
Okay.
But Bama week 2 is obviously a marquee opponent. Kansas State, and then a road game at TCU in week 10 and 11. Tough back-to-back slate there. Who knows? You've also got Kansas and Oklahoma back-to-back weeks in weeks 5 and 6. Again, who knows there? I feel pretty good about Texas's chances there. But I just think a really solid schedule from top to bottom. There are good opponents on this thing. Not a whole lot of murderers / wounders rows to worry about. I feel good about where Texas is at, but I think just because of the overall uncertainty I have with respect to the Big 12, I don't know where I put them. Where I put them in terms of this over under 9.5. Again, I come back to the Baylor thing. Baylor week 4 on the road. If Baylor is good, Baylor could beat them with a retooled offense that doesn't turn the ball over, with hopefully a better defense. There's a possibility there, especially getting that game at home for the Bears. But it just feels to me like Texas is in a good spot.
Sure.
They will probably get to 9 wins, no issue, but getting above that 10-win plateau pushing a little bit higher, trying to be Big 12 or, a playoff contender. That to me is really the question this year.
So, I mean, when you look at this schedule specifically, because we can talk about the roster, we can talk about Sark, we can talk about last year, we can talk about where they need to improve and situationally where they're good, where they're not good, whatever. They played, or their underlying numbers suggested that they were of a 9 or 10 win caliber last year.
That's right.
But they're a team that has dum-dums in them. And you win your clunkers, you don't lose your clunkers. That's what we say on this show. Wins are better than losses. So, where are the dum-dum moments for Texas on this schedule?
Is there a dum-dum moment at home against BYU a week before K-State and TCU? Is there a dum-dum moment a week after TCU on the road at Iowa State? I could see that. We know that Iowa State and Texas have a little bit of recent history.
Sure.
The Baylor game, again, I come back to that. I don't know what to make of Baylor, but a week before the Kansas and Oklahoma stretch, maybe, that again, I keep coming back to this, but part of, I think, the fascination I have with the conference is that you have a lot of teams that feel solid on some level, but you can very easily envision dum-dum moments, whether it's Texas or Oklahoma or K-State or teams maybe a rung below. It just feels like there is enough parity and enough firepower throughout that you could see some of these dumb games. Even Texas Tech, to close out the season on Black Friday.
Sure.
Games in Austin, but hey, who knows where Tech will be by then?
I agree. Look, the way that they lose to TCU, not scoring an offensive touchdown in that game, I believe, last year, losing late to Oklahoma State before Oklahoma State's collapse, losing in overtime to Texas Tech. So what you're saying is not far-fetched, and I don't think that was a Tyler Shuck game for Texas Tech either.
No.
And then losing by 1 to Alabama. I think they can get 2 games better. I think they can go 10-2. I think they can go 10-2 with a Bama win.
Yeah.
By the way, right? They could beat Bama and still lose, to TCU and Texas Tech or Oklahoma and TCU, whatever. I just think it takes some time to get the dum-dum DNA out. And with the way that offense seemed to collapse in second halves, they will be better. I am positive they will be better in second halves. I will be positive we are not going to finish the season watching Texas football and say, man, they really miss Bijan Robinson. I don't think he's replaceable in that, like, it's 1-to-1, but I think you can get productivity out of, the young running backs that they have. I think they're going to be very good at receiver. They might have the best left tackle in the country in Kelvin Banks. Yeah. The defense is going to continue to take steps forward, especially getting after the quarterback, and the secondary should be very good. It's just scoring points in second halves, fixing what needs to be corrected last year, and they're fine. They're absolutely fine. So I have them, I'm positive they're going to be better than they were last year. They're going to win 9 games at the very least. Positive.
Yeah, I agree.
And if they're an actually well-coached team, they win 11. That's all.
Let's go to Kansas. Kansas was kind of the sweetheart of last season. They were one of the stories that everybody gravitated to. The job that Lance Leipold has done in a very short time in Lawrence has been incredible. The guy can coach.
Yeah.
And it's part of why when he was hired in the first place, you and I were both pretty excited. Seemed like a good move. Guy knew how to coach. Guy had a track record. Doesn't seem like he's eager to jump ship. It was really the best of all worlds for Kansas. And last season saw some of that pay off. This season, I'm not going to say it's an easy schedule. It's not an easy schedule. It's got good buffers.
Buffer zone.
And 2 of their 3 hardest games are at home. You've got Kansas playing Texas a week before the Red River Shootout. You've got Oklahoma, the Oklahoma game, a week before Bedlam. That's why I say they're King Gump.
I must have drank me about 15 Dr. Peppers.
2 look-ahead spots for the 2 biggest games on this schedule. For my money, Kansas at a 6.5 win total sets up as maybe the best TV show in the Big 12. Because we know they're going to play offense. I don't know about defense. We'll find out about defense.
I don't know why there's a reason to believe, but continue.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where we stand on the defensive thing, but I think we saw enough competence on offense that we can expect a similar thing this season. I am excited about Kansas without fully knowing how I feel. Based solely on what we saw a year ago and the strides and the improvements that we saw at least on the offensive side of the ball, I feel excited. What I don't really know is how this schedule benefits them or works against them. Frankly, it seems like a great unknown to me, which is part of why I just think it'll be a hell of a TV show.
Oh, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be one. They could start the season 5-1, 6-1, something like that. When you look at things,
here's where we're at. I'll read through this very quickly.
Yeah,
Missouri State week 1, Illinois week 2, which will actually be
at home though in Lawrence.
At home, both are at home. The Illinois game could be interesting. Week 3 at Nevada, week 4 home against BYU. Then week 5, we go to Texas, come back home against UCF, go back on the road against Oklahoma State before a bye, then home again against Oklahoma, then on the road at Iowa State. 2 home games, week 11 and 12, Texas Tech and Kansas State. They close things out on the road against Cincinnati.
Sure.
Yep. It's not easy, but good buffers, and most of the tough games are at home.
No, are they well coached enough, which I believe to be the case, to win 45-41 more often than losing 45-41.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm right there with you. And great TV show, but an unserious program in terms of taking the next step at this moment, because you need to attract defensive talent to win one-on-one battles. I think I know they kept their defensive coordinator from last year, which is, I guess, fine, but it just sort of feels like until you figure out how to get talent, like he's going to be the patsy if they have another terrible defense, and I just don't think they have the guys right now to be anything more than entertaining.
BYU is a newcomer in the Big 12 this year.
Mm-hmm.
I went through these schedules. I tried to guess in advance what the over-unders were. So as we're kind of presenting it here, I'm giving that out at the top. Some context clues as to what Vegas thinks. People smarter than us think.
Right.
But when I went through, I guessed. And I said to myself, BYU is going to be lucky to get 5. The over-under is 5.5. So I wasn't too far off. This is truly one of those welcome to the dynasty moments that I talked about with the ACC preview, where they're just sort of loaded up. In effect, the games against teams like Utah State and Liberty and East Carolina and something called Utah Tech, which is apparently a football team, those games that they had last year have basically been swapped out and replaced with Big 12 teams. So it's an order of magnitude harder, and you would expect that, going from where BYU was or where Cincinnati was or where Houston was to now being a full member of the Big 12. The question of how BYU can navigate this, I think, is a totally separate question from the objective fact that the schedule is tough, right? Where BYU is at as a program is completely separate from the fact that this is just tough. This tough doesn't matter who you are. Sam Houston and Southern Utah weeks 1 and 2. Okay, fine. But then back-to-back road games at Arkansas and Kansas.
Right.
Tough.
Coming off of their own catastrophically bad defensive season. Yeah.
That's right. Week 5, home against Cincinnati. Short week, though, on a Friday before they go into a bye. Then after the bye, week 7 at TCU. Home against Texas Tech. Back-to-back road games at Texas, at West Virginia. Back-to-back home games, Iowa State and Oklahoma. Close out the year on the road at Oklahoma State. 6 true road games. There's also a lot new for BYU. Keaton Slovis apparently still playing these days. The presumed starter. Jay Hill is the new defensive coordinator. They brought him over from Weber State to try and reboot the defense. I thought a shrewd move by Kalani Sitake because the defense was not shrewd last year. They were really bad.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot new. They're jumping into this new conference. The schedule is harder. A confluence of events here that makes it really tough for me to get behind BYU.
Yeah, it's you're right with the fettuccine. That's what I wrote down. You better carbo load during that bye week.
More fettuccine Alfredo and drank less water than I have in my entire life.
It's tough. It's really tough after the bye.
Yeah, and it is nice that if you are a BYU fan and you're going through the schedule and ticking off where you think the wins could come from, it'd be nicer if Kansas were at home. It'd be nicer if West Virginia were at home. But I think here's what I like about BYU right now. They are a team, they're a program that it seems like they don't do anything poorly for long. No. And I think that's reflective of Kalani Sitake being a quality, at the very least. I think he's a quality coach who's made some savvy hires. And he's found dudes, and obviously you have the home field advantage of playing at altitude. I think it'll get corrected. He himself was an excellent defensive coordinator. So I think that's going to get fixed. I think they're going to be able to find bodies. If they are just average at both offense and defense, which seems to be the calling card of Keaton Slovis offenses, and maybe he's just unlucky and he stopped following Graham Harrell around, whatever. I mean, Graham Harrell wasn't at Pitt, but you know what I'm saying. That maybe it's the fresh start that he needs to be pretty good like he was early on in his USC time. But I don't know. There's too much iffy to me, and I'm with you that if they go to a bowl in year one, round of applause. That's a success.
Yeah, this is going to be year 8 for Kalani Sitake, by the way.
Yeah, I meant year 1 in the conference, but yes.
Year 1 in the conference. But the point on Kalani Sitake, I agree with you. He's a solid coach.
Yeah.
And only, one of his seasons did they not go at least 500? Last 2 seasons, they finished with double-digit wins. Well, no. 2020, 2021 finished with double-digit wins.
Mm-hmm.
Went to the bowl game and won last year. So,
and their situation is different though than looking at Houston or UCF or Cincinnati in that they've scheduled a ton of Power 5 teams as an independent program, right? That they're not coming off of a Mountain West schedule or something. You're like, how are they going to make? No, they've been scheduling we joked 2 years ago that they won the Pac-12, right? Because of the sheer number of teams in that conference that they beat, scheduling independently. So I don't think they're going to be surprised by the size and speed and athleticism of the Big 12. I'm just more concerned of going into this conference with the defense they put on the field last year and then a quarterback at his third stop. Like, that's worrisome to me. But no, they're the most acclimated, I think, to what the schedule has.
From a scheduling standpoint, I mean, last year played Baylor, played Oregon, played Notre Dame, played Arkansas, played Boise, even Boise State you can throw in there.
Sure.
They had high quality teams on that schedule. Let me shift then. Let's go to some of the other newcomers.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Houston. The schedule is not overpowering in terms of road games. They've got Rice, they've got Texas Tech, K-State, Baylor, UCF to close out the season. My biggest issue for Houston is that they were 7-5 a year ago with a bad defense against a much, much, much worse schedule.
Yeah.
And when I mean worse, I'm talking like you're swapping in teams like Texas and K-State for Navy and Temple.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen there, do you think? Do you have any suggestions as to what might happen? This is why the over-under is 4.5, right? Because I don't know if Houston is equipped in the way that a BYU is equipped to handle that big of an order of magnitude, that shift in terms of schedule. Now, they could get there. They've got a fertile recruiting ground in the state of Texas. I think they've got a coach who knows a thing or two about playing Power 5 football. I think Houston is a good addition to this conference, not just with respect to football, but also basketball, where Houston's been a really good team. I just don't know what year 1 looks like. Year 1 kind of frightens me here.
I'm scared for Houston a little bit. Now,
yeah,
coaching-wise, they're in a good place. They're starting over at quarterback. The portal wasn't terribly kind to them. I think they lose their star running back from 2 years ago, Alton McCaskill to Colorado. So I don't know. That doesn't really reflect anything, but their defense was awesome 2 years ago and terrible last year. And so the optimist in me says, well, look, they got to get back to, rushing the passer. I think that's where they're especially strong, getting after the passer 2 years ago. And it fell off a cliff last year. So to me, it's just going to be a matter of, is the talent there? Is the coaching good enough? Is quarterback going to be in an okay place? You look at Dana Holgerson's track record, it probably will be. The offense will probably be in a pretty good place. I just think there's too many questions on defense, too many questions about inconsistency. I don't think the home field advantage is going to be especially pronounced. So I'm worried about Houston in year 1, but open to being pleasantly surprised. The schedule specifically, because this isn't necessarily a preview show, I think it's okay early in terms of finding their footing. UTSA is tough, but it's at Rice, TCU, Sam Houston, at Texas Tech. It's tough, but it's not crazy.
Yeah, it's not overpowering, at least not in terms of road games.
It seems buffery, even though there's tough matchups with Texas, Kansas State back-to-back in the back half of the year. But you're telling me Baylor's going to struggle again in certain ways? Cincinnati's going to struggle, Oklahoma State, UCF. UCF's going to be tough in the bounce house, but I don't know. It's hard to see bowl eligibility, but I can see breaks, get them to 6-6, sure.
Let's talk about Cincinnati.
Let's.
Are you more concerned about Houston in year one or Cincinnati in year one? In the Big 12.
That's a good question. I guess it would just come down to schedule. And Cincinnati's schedule seems maybe a little bit better because of the gumpiness. So maybe I feel better about Cincinnati, that the roster's been built up enough. Luke Fickell, I think, doesn't get enough credit as a quality recruiter, even though there were a ton of transfers and an overhaul of the roster. There are. And I don't love Scott Satterfield.
No, so look, I don't hate the schedule.
Yeah.
I think the schedule's about as good as you could hope for in year one in a new conference. And they're home against the best team on their schedule, Oklahoma. I had a hard time, though, looking at this objectively because I don't feel good about Cincinnati at all.
No.
This is not a situation. You hear this a lot when you've got a new coach where you hear the term reboot.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a reboot. This is someone tripped over the power cord and you're scrambling around trying how to plug it back in.
Mm-hmm.
The combo of Luke Fickell leaving, of Scott Satterfield coming in, of joining a new conference, of getting a much tougher schedule, of bolting together an offense and defense in the transfer portal. We'll go into all of this in much, much more detail when we do previews.
Starting quarterback opted for the Northwestern offensive experience. Yeah.
That's right. Ben Bryant out.
Yeah.
So it's either Emory Jones or Evan Prater getting the nod this year at quarter. There's just so much in flux at Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that the program is in a really good spot when Luke Fickell left. Neither one of us is crazy about the Scott Satterfield experience, about him being the guy to come in. Like, I don't get that at all. I'm really worried about Cincinnati in year one. I like that 2 of their 5 road games are at Pitt and West Virginia, which are very close.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like long haul trips here across the country or anything. But there's so much in flux and the schedule gets harder, and I don't really care for Scott Satterfield, that I am selling really hard on Cincy this year. They might hit the over, but I'm selling hard. And I'm not putting my money behind that.
So if I'm reading this correctly, it's no Texas, Kansas State, TCU.
Correct.
Okay, that's a good starting place.
Yeah.
So in terms of gumpiness, they get Pitt on the road, but it's the week before the brawl, right? Before the backyard brawl. It's Oklahoma's first game against a new Big 12 team. Not that that means anything. Iowa State after Iowa State's run of Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, TCU. Oklahoma State pre-Bedlam. West Virginia between West Virginia at Oklahoma and at Baylor. Okay, that's tough. Kansas post-Sunshine Showdown, post-rivalry. And they miss arguably 3 of the top-ish tier teams that they could get. So if they're just fine, right? If the transfers work out, I'm absolutely worried about them in year one. But big picture, Cincinnati, a home field advantage, the nearby talent, the ability that Luke Fickell has shown to win big. Coaches, plural, have won big at Cincinnati. This is a place that fosters success.
Sure.
So big picture, pretty pumped for Cincinnati.
I don't hate the schedule.
If Scott Satterfield is better, I think, than he looked like at Louisville, which is tough. We see inside somewhere in there's a good coach, but recent results haven't been amazing. So you got to squint a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, I'm pretty bullish on Cincinnati in this conference. It's just, as you mentioned, there's just so much new. There's so much new that if they're merely fine, schedule's awesome. So
yeah.
I'm not down on Cincinnati, but it's going to be an uphill battle.
The final new team in the conference this year is UCF.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 4 newcomers, they're the one with the highest over under 6.5. There is a little bit of a Fettuccine Alfredo situation starting week 4. I won't play the sound again, but week 4 at K-State, then home against Baylor, then at Kansas before a bye, then at Oklahoma, home against West Virginia, at Cincinnati, home against Oklahoma State, at Texas Tech, home against Houston. So kind of an every other situation for UCF. They do have the sunflower sandwich, as we mentioned earlier, with Baylor as the patty in between K-State and Kansas. I don't know. Like what we said on previous versions of the schedule preview is that if you come out of a schedule and you don't really have notes, that's a good thing. I wasn't moved one way or the other. There are some tough road spots here that frighten me a little bit for a newcomer into the conference. But I do feel like UCF's been a fairly stable program, as you said about Cincinnati, right? Coaches have had success with this team. And it feels to me like, Gus Malzahn knows how to play Power 5 football. Might not have the defensive manpower to really stack up against, a team where you need to try and contain the defense, and it's Oklahoma, right? But I think by and large, UCF's in a pretty good spot. So I wasn't moved one way or the other with this.
Do they have a quarterback who can throw the ball 10 yards down the field?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. That to me is everything with this schedule, that they can sort of paint the corners and come away with some wins. They were fine. They weren't terrible at anything last year other than throwing the ball downfield, which seems important. UCF's schedule is, in terms of home road splits, there's a lot of winnable games at home, and that is a definite home field advantage.
I agree.
And so they can win all of their home games, which gets them to 7 wins. And then winning at Kansas, sure. Winning at Cincinnati or Texas Tech, tough, but maybe. I don't think they're going to be very bad at anything. Like, I still think they're going to be able to move the ball, just maybe not in an explosive air way. I think they're going to be good. Not great. I think they're going to be good. I think they're better prepared. They were good in the portal, and they will continue to be good in the portal because of their geography and because of Gus Malzahn. So I don't think they're going to be splashy in year one, but I think they're going to be tough. I think that the schedule's fine.
Of the remaining 3 teams here that we have, which are Texas Tech, Iowa State, and West Virginia, who interests you the most?
I mean, the brutality of West Virginia's schedule is notable.
Oh, my God. We talked about this before. We don't have to go into too much more detail on this, but
yeah.
Over-under's 4.5. They've got Penn State, TCU, Houston, UCF, Oklahoma, and Baylor all on the road. They've also got a home game in here against Pitt, backyard brawl, a home game in here against Texas Tech. There are a few others that I could use to fill in the gaps of the conversation, but go back and listen to our West Virginia show. It's just almost impossible that they're going to come out of this thing and hit the over. I don't feel great about Neil Brown and his prospects of making it out alive this season.
Right.
But go back and listen to our West Virginia show. We have much more detail on where this program stands.
A good number. I mean, it's a kind of an even split in terms of where the winnable games are. But I think if you're West Virginia and you're looking at the schedule, you have to root for turbulence and airport delays and right, that Morgantown
weather
be far away, although it's not as far away with adding, UCF and Cincinnati to the conference. That, you're rooting for travel difficulties for teams coming to Morgantown with long flights. And you're like, I didn't sleep at all. It was a noon kick or something. Otherwise, it's a tough to get Penn State. Look, if you're going to be at Penn State, you might as well get them week 1, where weird things happen. But otherwise, oh man,
it's tough.
Don't love it.
I feel bad for him.
Yep,
I do. But the
it's just
counterpoint
no
is
obvious quarterback, right? No obvious winning quarterback.
No,
Like, it's just
no.
Yeah.
The counterpoint is that you play some good teams.
Yeah.
Get to watch some good football, hopefully.
And I guess the other counterpoint is if you look at the actual, this is what we do for some of these teams. You're like, what's the list of quarterbacks that scare you on West Virginia's schedule? Drew Aller should scare you.
Yeah.
Phil Jurkovec. Tyler Shuck probably should scare you. Chandler Morris, we'll see. Houston, we'll see. Oklahoma State, probably not. UCF, probably not. BYU, probably not. Cincinnati, probably not. Baylor, probably not. I don't know.
All right. Let's go to Texas Tech. Texas Tech over under 7.5.
Yeah.
Pretty good number for Tech.
Mm-hmm.
Tech was my all-time Forrest Gump team a year ago. They were in the oddest crevasses for all of their opponents.
Mm-hmm.
Traps and letdowns and sandwiches. The best I can say this year is that there are good buffers.
Buffer zone.
Mm-hmm.
And a great set of home games. If you're a season ticket holder,
It's great.
great. Oregon, K-State, and TCU all come to Lubbock this year.
Mm-hmm.
The road slate isn't terrible either. At Texas to close out the year on Black Friday. That could be a fun trip up from Lubbock. Got a road game in there at Kansas, at BYU, at Baylor, at West Virginia, at Wyoming. Not terrible. All very workable here.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this comes down to where Joe McGuire has his program. And you did the interview with Chris Level a few weeks back. Go back and listen to that for more info on where the program is at. Again, we will reserve some of our prognostication here for our eventual previews. But yeah, there's some ammo on the schedule. You get some of those tough games at home, which is a nice little cherry on top.
Mm-hmm.
Can they get to 8 wins with this?
Yes, is my answer. I like Texas Tech this year. I like them just because of what returns, what they flashed in year one. If they're able to go downfield on offense a bit more with a healthy Tyler Shuck, yeah, I like them. I think the defense is going to get better. Now, they lost their clear best defensive player last year, but from last year, I don't know. I think there's more to like about Texas Tech right now than there are a number of teams, most of which is due to a pretty awesome schedule.
Yeah.
Now,
well, with a healthy Tyler Shuck, though, is carrying a lot of weight there.
But the home road splits are pretty good in terms of taking the next step. And if the best of the defense flashes more often than it did last year, it's a tough-ish quarterback slate. I mean, it's Will Howard and Bo Nix before the bye. It's a late bye game, so maybe that at BYU game after 7 straight games, that would be one I would circle, be like, I don't know about that. That might be like a very obvious home dog pick for the Cougars there. But otherwise, yeah, I think they can definitely go 8-4 for sure.
Let's close things out with Iowa State. Iowa State's over under 5.5.
Mm-hmm.
I am extremely mixed on this.
Okay.
And I come back to what I said earlier. How you feel about the Iowa State schedule probably says more about you than it does about them. I don't know where I stand on Iowa State this year. Playing Iowa week 2 is hard in the rivalry, the Cy-Hawk game.
Mm-hmm.
Playing Oklahoma State, playing at Oklahoma, back home against TCU, that's a tough stretch. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, TCU. Closing out with Texas on the road against Kansas State, that's a tough stretch as well.
Texas at home, on the road against Kansas State, just because you blended those two. That was a compound sentence, but yes.
Correct. But also, like, Oklahoma State might be beatable. Cincy, Baylor, Kansas, BYU in the middle of the schedule might be beatable. There's some gumpiness here.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas gets them after Oklahoma. Oklahoma gets them before Texas. Texas gets them after TCU. I could play this down, but you get the picture. So it's really what you want to see with Iowa State, isn't it?
Yeah, I want to see a quarterback, and I want to see whatever happens on offense. I mean, they make the change at coordinator. But, yeah, Iowa State, to me, is still a good – they're a well-coached team. I think Matt Campbell is not a flash-in-the-pan type guy. I think there's a reason why he has risen the floor. Risen the floor? That might be English-ish for Iowa State. They have the Cy-Hawk game at home, as you mentioned. Texas is in a good place. That's in the shadow of Texas at TCU. It's their second straight road game.
Yep.
You tell me that's a 17-15 Iowa State win right now? Totally believable.
Yeah.
Absolutely believable. Farmageddon on the road at BYU feels like I'm just a believer in the altitude thing. So I think they're bowl eligible. I think they're better than they were last year. I just don't think if you are to believe Matt Campbell is a full-on good coach, which I believe. I don't know where you stand right now after last year's offense, but I believe him to be a full-on good, maybe not great, maybe a bit overinflated given his youth and the ability to get a traditionally uneven Iowa State program into a much better place. They win the Fiesta Bowl 2020 against Oregon. No. If we believe him to be a good coaches don't miss bowls 2 straight years. So I'm in on Iowa State as being one of those teams that improves because the foundation is there, the culture is there. This is not a deep dive into their roster, what's back, what's not back, but I think it's workable enough and situationally advantageous enough. So I'm fine with Iowa State.
That does it for the Big 12. All 14 teams now.
Yes.
In the Big 12, we eagerly await the rebrand from Brett Yormark. Who knows what happens? Who knows what happens by the time the season gets here with respect to this conference potentially getting bigger. We've heard a lot of wild tales on the Pac-12 media side, and those rumors persist. They have not gotten softer. They've only gotten a little bit louder as we get deeper into the summer months here. We'll do our best to cover it if there is news to cover. But for the time being, anyway, 14 teams, Texas and Oklahoma, their farewell tour will definitely be interesting to follow. Let us know your thoughts. Again, solidverbal@gmail.com is the email. You can also find us out on social media. We post clips. We post links to all of our episodes and much, much more. If you want to get early access to this podcast episode, to all of our podcast episodes, to the video, if you want to watch us do them live, you can do so at verballers.com, verballers.com. As we said at the top, we've got another schedule preview that we're going to do for our next episode talking about G5 teams. We're going to pick out a sampling of ones that are of interest to us and delve a little bit more into their schedules and what the future might hold for them. Eventually, we're going to give out our win total picks. We've got a fun show planned for that. Eventually, we're going to dive right into preview content. It's getting to that time of year, man.
Can I ask you one final question about the Big 12?
Please.
And I think this underscores our whole conversation. 4.5 good quarterbacks as of today?
Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel.
Yep. Jalen Daniels.
Yeah.
That's 4.
That's 4.
I have Tyler Shuck as the half. Just because, 1, his time at Oregon wasn't particularly pretty at the end of games, and 2, he gets beat up, and we'll see. That's what I have, 4.5, which makes me think there are going to be a number of teams between 5-7 and 7-5.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there are multiple half quarterbacks if they add up to 1, but
right.
You know, you can make a half case for Tyler Shuck if he's healthy.
That's what my case is. Yeah.
You can make a case for Blake Shapen if he gets a little bit more consistent.
When it was announced that he won the job, Baylor fans were like, "Ooh, God, really? Why
Keaton
not even?"
Slovis, if we get back to the
speak with
halcyon
your heart,
days
Ty.
of Keaton
Speak
Slovis,
with your knowledge loins.
My knowledge loins would say no.
Yeah.
My knowledge loins would take the under.
Yeah, I'm saying 4.5, which is both great and a bit of a bummer.
Let us know your thoughts out on social media. For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrandt. Join in next episode to talk G5. Stay solid.
Peace.